Welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Force podcast, a Puerto Rican podcast talking about Star Wars and other nerd-related media. We are in a post-Skeleton Crew world, which means that we are finally premiering the newest season of this podcast for 2025. And what a week to start it! What a way to start it! And what a book to start discussing the events that are going to probably shape a lot of the ways that we talk about Star Wars in 2025 in the next couple of years. Very excited to be able to start this season of Triad of the Force talking with Dr. Chris Kempshall, the author of various history books and Star Wars books, but more contextually, the one we're going to talk about today, the rise and fall. Oh, we have that Zoom blur going in. The rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. Welcome, Dr. Kempshall.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. For a minute then, it looked like, the Empire had censored had blurred the title of the book.
Right, but thankfully in this country we have freedom of speech, which is why TikTok is going the way of the dodo. Although apparently the leader might bring it back, but we'll get to all that fun stuff and the parallelisms that Star Wars has with the real world, even though some people insist that Star Wars isn't political. But Dr. Kempshall, thank you. You're a historian and author. You know, you've written widely about the First World War and other modern media, particularly video games, and most specifically Star Wars. We're very excited to have you bring your knowledge, academic knowledge about the world and how it's been applied into Star Wars. So we want to get to know you a little bit more. You're over at the UK right now.
I am.
How's
Yep, yep, yep.
how's everything over there right now? So I know there's also been a lot of political changes going on that
Oh,
side.
the UK is the UK. In any given circumstance, the United Kingdom will do whatever the United Kingdom's going to do in most circumstances. It's all right over here. It's cold. I always
Mhm.
forget how cold January and February are.
Mhm.
So even like little odd things like it's starting to get a little lighter in the evenings, but there are kind of times of the day when it's like, well, I'm gonna close the curtains to keep the light in, to
Yeah.
avoid like the grey darkness seeping into the house at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because it's night now. Apparently lunchtime is over and therefore it's night. um so aside from that, I mean, once it starts getting a little brighter and the like, but
Mhm.
where I live in the UK, I mean, I used to live right by the sea when I was growing up,
Mhm.
which was, beautiful in the summer. It was really, really nice. And then in the winter, I could watch my car rust in real time, just with
Yeah.
heavy rain and salt water from the sea and the
Mhm.
like. So I'm a little bit more inland now. Um, but yeah, winter's getting a little tedious at this point, I think.
I mean, I know exactly what you mean. As everyone from the podcast knows, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'm from Puerto Rico, but I'm currently living in Chicago, and right now we're getting a cold front, so the temperature is rapidly dropping, and
Oh, that sounds fun.
tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday are gonna be cold in more ways than one, and I don't know which one I'm dreading over the other, but
One of them
yeah.
might bring snow.
I I guess that we have to. I don't even know that's good anymore. But
I've
but
always been quite enamored with snow because we never used to get it when I was growing up, and now we get it relatively often, which does rather suggest slightly kind of uncomfortable things about the climate.
correct,
Um,
correct. Because it's the
but 'cause-
opposite here in Chicago. I feel like we used to get a lot more snow, and now we're
oh,
getting like a lot
interesting.
less. So so I think I
Yeah,
would
we
have
might be
to
getting
agree.
yours.
Yeah. But let's. I mean, I was just in the UK a couple months ago for like a good friend of mine who just moved to London with his lovely bride now, and he went over there to visit because he was getting married, and it's a lovely, lovely, lovely country. I definitely have appreciated visiting. I've been lucky to go there twice now. First time for Star Wars Celebration in Europe,
Which was great.
and which was amazing. And then
Not just because
obviously
it was an
last
hour
year.
from my house.
Ah, that's very convenient. Yes, it's definitely saved a couple more pounds than we do in,
Yeah.
in traveling, getting hotels. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Congratulations, by the way, like on all of this
Oh, thank
publishing
you.
success. I've seen on social media that the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire has been extremely well received, and everyone's very thrilled with the book. And I think it's been a great success. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, we obviously know that you have your doctorates and you're a historian, and that you write
Yeah.
about World War I. So tell us a little bit about that journey towards, how did Dr. Kempshall decide to become Dr. Kempshall and take this journey into history?
So I never actually wanted to be a historian when I was growing up. So when in school over here, which is the equivalent of like high school in the US, when you get up to like the third year of the equivalent of high school, you get to start then making decisions about what you want to study for like your future exams and bits and pieces like that. And I dropped history at that point because I wanted to be a soccer commentator. I wanted to be a sports journalist. Um,
In many ways, there's lots of parallels to that because I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I myself am not into sports at all, but in seeing a lot of my friends that are into sports, there's a lot of analogous behaviors there in terms of like how you're tracking
Yeah,
things, analyzing data, and making predictions too based on
like
that.
being
So
weirdly obsessive about stuff,
yeah, yeah.
and
So not
strangely
dissimilar, actually,
superstitious.
I would say.
So I kind of did that. So when I first went to university, I studied media studies, and there were a few kind of like school courses along the way, which might be like kind of the equivalent of like a minor, like a little like a minor course or so at American colleges. But eventually, I reached the conclusion that I probably wasn't going to be a sports commentator because you don't actually need that many. Particularly when this was 20 years ago, there weren't that many games on the TV. So they seemed relatively well stocked for football commentators. So then I had like a massive existential crisis,
Mhm,
and decided I'd go back and study a master's, basically because I didn't know what else to do. So I thought, well, you know what, I'll kick this can down the road by a
mhm,
year.
mhm,
Um, and I did a master's which was in kind of contemporary war and peace studies, which was super interesting. It was kind of like international relations with some kind of sprinkling from history in there. And then I finished that, and that was in 2006, and I was really tired. Like I had no idea what it was I wanted to do next, and I kind of knocked about unhappily for a year or so. Um, but as that year went on, I started thinking about more and more about basically more and more about the First World War because I'd
mhm,
done
mhm,
bits and pieces of it at my undergraduate, and I'd done bits and pieces of it at my master's, and I decided, you know what, I wanna go and do a PhD. So I, do more studying, and then I want to teach at university because I think that'll be fun. Um, and I started. So yeah, I did a PhD, which was basically about what British and French soldiers thought of each other
mhm, mhm,
during the First World War. And that lasted for like 5 years. And then I finished that, and again was like tired, and it was like, well, I'm going to do like hopefully, get an academic career and the like. But also, it was at that point that this kind of not particularly well hidden geeky side of me
mhm,
started kind of
mhm, mhm, mhm,
breaking out of the cage that I kept it trapped in. And I'd always liked, I'm a geek, I like computer games.
mhm,
So I started thinking about doing stuff about how the First World War and war in general appears in computer games. So I
mhm,
did a bit of that, and that went like surprisingly well. And I got the opportunity because of like I wrote an article about soldiers in First World War computer games. And during the First World War centenary, it was like 2014 to 2018, there was a YouTube channel called The Great War
mhm,
channel. And they were great. They basically went through the war in real time, week by week, which is an insane undertaking.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and they shared my article because it was free to read with their YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter followers. And normally, what happens when you write an academic article is like, I know the first names of the 5 people who will read it. We
Yeah.
could carpool if we were going somewhere.
Mhm,
And instead, like 3,000 people read it. Um, and as a result, like a publisher got in contact with me and said, do you want to do another book about something? And I was like,
mhm.
are we talking like proper First World War stuff, or are we talking geeky stuff? And he was like, what do you fancy? I was like, I want to write a book about an academic book about Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
Which is how I then a different book which is called The History and Politics of Star Wars that I wrote, and basically from all of that coming together, started laying in place the foundations for me to do like First World War academic stuff. but also to kind of branch out into geekier stuff that makes me happy. And from that, eventually, through like an even like a ridiculous series of events, the opportunity to do some
Mhm.
Star Wars stuff.
I mean, excuse me. I mean, and that's I think like a really fascinating and inspiring story, right? Because like so many people would like to be able to find like that happy spot where they can able to combine something that enriches them, professionally, but also enriches their personal
Yeah.
wants and desires. And I think like that's a really inspiring story because there is a way to be able to fuse
Yes.
a lot of the things that that we would think on first on first glance we wouldn't be able to merge. And I'm really glad that you like brought that like journey up into how you came into the history and politics of Star Wars, because that was like the sequence like of questions that we were going to go through in terms of like how you went from your academic career in history, then into writing, and then to Star Wars. So we kind of
Yeah.
got a little bit of that, which has been like really really interesting. But as a backdoor to history and politics of Star Wars, like what has been your relationship to Star Wars? As you were saying, like that was a geeky part of you that was maybe dormant for a while, but like how was that journey to be into Star Wars to all of a sudden be I want to write a history book about Star
Yeah.
Wars?
I mean, even though like an overarching, there are good things about turning your hobbies into work, and there are
Mhm,
definitely bad things about turning your hobbies into
mhm,
work. So,
mhm,
occasionally it's like, I'm totally burned out from work. I'm just going to relax and I'm going to play a computer game. Oh no, wait, hang on. No, yeah, actually that feels like work. You know what? I'm going to watch the
mhm,
Star
mhm,
Wars. Oh no, wait, hang on. That also feels like work. So, there's a give and take with it. And with Star Wars, I've always been a Star Wars fan. Star Wars has existed in my world basically for as long as I can remember. So we recorded the original trilogy on VHS off the
mhm,
TV here in
mhm,
the UK in like the 1980s. Um, and I watched them to death over and over and over again, to the extent that it's quite weird when I watch them now when there aren't advert breaks where there
mhm.
should be advert breaks,
Yeah.
and it just cuts to like a weird 1980s furniture advert because they were always shown around Christmas, so it would always be like a
Mhm,
Christmas sale type thing. Um, and I played a lot of Star Wars computer games, like kind of like Super Star Wars on like the SNES,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I played Star Wars Galaxies on the PC, which was a big part of my life. And the X-Wing versus Tie Fighter games, all of those
mhm,
various games, and I got really really into it probably around 1997 when I went on
mhm,
holiday to Florida, and I went to downtown Disney. Now, in downtown Disney in Florida, there used to be an enormous Virgin megastore. I've got no idea if it's still there because I don't actually think Virgin as a company still exists in that
no
sense.
clue either. Yeah.
But it was like a five-story building, and on like the third floor was science fiction books. And I went in there and I was looking for something to read, and I picked up Spectre of the Past by
Mhm,
Timothy
mhm,
Zahn.
mhm,
I was like, I like Star Wars, I like books, this is a Star Wars book. I've never read a Star Wars book, but I'll read this Star Wars book. And then just gobbled it up in like 24 hours. And then I plunged fully into the old expanded universe um, from there. So there's always been this kind of big Star Wars kind of interest in me.
mhm,
Um, and the kind of the realization that I could branch out from, I don't know, what you might call hard history, like the
mhm,
First World War, to other aspects, like how the First World War is portrayed in media, or how
mhm,
computer games show history, or how Star Wars uses history, um and the like, then came at like a quite a good time for me when I was trying to figure out what things I wanted to look at and what things I thought was going to be fun, and deciding that at that stage in my life the criteria I was going to apply to, particularly to academic work, was, will this make me happy? If yes, then do
mhm,
it. If
mhm.
no, then don't.
Right.
Because there's loads of stuff about some academic work that does not make me happy at all.
Mhm,
And I decided, you know what, I just wanna have some fun. Um, and I was working on like a variety of research projects, including some about like the British and French Army over history, and some other bits and pieces. And then the pandemic came,
mhm,
which was scary in its own way, but also very very inconvenient because all of the archives closed and I couldn't get anything done. Um, and briefly over here in the UK, so this must have been August 2020, I think. The big library in London, which is called the British Library, which
mhm.
holds like a copy of every book published, reopened really briefly. It was probably only open for about 3 or 4 weeks. And I went in on the second day it was open because I was like, "We're going to reopen." I was like, "Booked. I have
Mhm,
booked
mhm,
my
mhm,
desk. I am going to book a hotel so that I can get in there at 9 a.m. in the morning." Um, and I went in and I did some research, and I came out and I did what all academics of a certain age did. I tweeted that the British
mhm,
Library's back open. It's fine, for people who are worried, because this is, there was no vaccine at this point.
mhm.
People were masking, there was loads of hand sanitizing, everybody was socially distancing. If you need to use the British Library and you're worried about it, I felt fine. And the British Library contacted me on Twitter and basically said, "Do you mind if we share this around a little bit to
Mhm,
to
mhm,
to help with people?" I said, "Yeah, it's on the internet. Do whatever you want." And they're like,
mhm.
"Oh, fantastic. Can you let us know a little bit about what it is that you were doing, just so we can add some context?" I said I was doing this thing about the British and the French armies,
Yeah.
and I was doing a little bit of research for my academic Star Wars book. And they tweeted out my thing, and they tweeted out what it was that I was doing, and that got seen by an editor at DK
Mhm,
who contacted like an editor who was working on a book at DK called Battles That Changed the Galaxy,
mhm, mhm,
which was a military history in universe of the Star Wars galaxy. And they contacted me to say, "Do you fancy getting involved in helping us write Battles That Changed the Galaxy?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do fancy that." And it was from then that I did Battles, and it was then from then that I got the opportunity to kind of start talking about the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which was a book that I'd really, really wanted to write. Oh, I say really, really wanted to write. It was in that sense of it would be cool if X existed and I'd read it, but it would be even cooler if I wrote it. But that's never going to happen because in no rational universe does that happen. So it was on that kind of level of wishful
Yeah.
thinking.
So in many ways, you'd say that Rise and Fall of Galactic Empire was always an idea that was in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I think in that sense, it's when you're because of like the historical training, when you look at stuff, and particularly because I was working on that academic book of Star Wars,
Mhm,
you start looking at things and go, God, this would be a really cool thing to look at or this would be a
mhm,
cool
mhm.
thing if it existed. So it was definitely something that I really, really wanted to do, but had no expectation that it would ever happen because what is even the route as like a random academic to writing such a thing? It just there's no pathway. It's never going to happen.
Because in many ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, like it's very they work hand in hand, right? History and politics and Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, because one kind of objectively documents, the other one is subjectively analyzes, but they both have to have kind of a similar structure in terms of like how you're looking and organizing like all these events that happen across the galaxy.
Yeah, I like to kind of try and say that I applied a similar level of academic
Hmm.
rigor to both books, despite the fact that one of them is like an actual academic book and one of them is
Hmm.
pretending to be an academic book. But in that sense, as like a historian, I approached them both, kind of like with like a straight bat. In
Hmm.
this, if you're going to do this, you actually have to do this, and that
Hmm.
was true for like my academic book, but particularly for Rise and Fall. That if you're going to write an in-universe academic history book, you have to do it. You have to kind of approach it as seriously as if you were to do
Hmm.
any other like real world book.
Yeah, and we were talking right before kind of starting to record that I actually bought History and Politics of Star Wars first before buying Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, but life has been busy in the last couple months, and so I had not been able to get into History and Politics of Star Wars, but now having read Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, I definitely want this interview to be part of a duology in terms in how we talk about Rise and Fall, and then in a separate interview, hopefully talk about history and politics of Star Wars, because I think these conversations, well, one, they're enriching regardless of the fact,
Yeah,
but in the times that we're approaching, I think they're even more relevant because I think media has always been a place in which these conversations that are very difficult to have in the real world can be applied in these fantastical universes to kind of make things easier to digest in many ways.
yeah.
So
Well,
hopefully
thank
we
you for your book buying service.
yes. Yeah, and I will continue to do so because I think they're excellent books to have for like our Star Wars brethren and siblings out there, because I feel like a lot of us need to kind of read a lot of this background. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Um, one of the things that I wanted to ask you in terms of like process is, we're talking about writing history and nonfiction and the approach that you have to take to one. And while Rise and Fall of Galactic Empire is kind of a nonfiction history book, it's still
Yeah,
very, I mean, obviously Star Wars didn't, I mean, not obviously, who knows? Maybe there's a parallel universe in which it did happen. But at least in this one that we live in, Star Wars is a fantasy, it's sci-fi fantasy. So
yeah.
like what was the process of writing a fantasy fiction book using like nonfiction tools that you've used in your historical approaches for your other nonfiction writings?
Yeah. So, I mean, similarly to kind of to all of things, and something that I always used to say to my students is when you start thinking about the topic, whatever it is you're going to, whether it's a book about the First World War or an essay about, I don't know, the French Revolution or whatever, eventually you reach a point when you have to decide what is it that you want to say.
Mhm,
What is this actually about? Um, and that's true for like my normal academic work, but it's particularly true for when I was kind of sketching out in my head, what does Beaumont Kin, who was the in-universe historian
mhm,
that I selected really, really early on, like he at the very foundation level of when this was looking like it was going to be a thing, it was like it has to be Beaumont Kin. This is my guy.
mhm,
Um, what does he want to say? And there's a reason why he's the historian, but there's also a reason why this book exists in universe in the time that it exists. It
mhm,
kind of, as far as I was concerned, it had to be written after the Rise of Skywalker. It had to be a reflective back in light of new information. And that Beaumont Kin has to be a part of this book. He's not some detached narrator who knows everything, who sees everything. Um, and I've always thought that to like varying extents, and it's not necessarily a criticism because um, how often do people interact with historians? But that people don't necessarily understand what historians do.
do,
You know,
mhm,
it's fine for a historian to go, "This is what I think. This is what I believe. This is what I'm arguing." It's fine for them to be present in their own argument. Whereas I think a lot of people tend to think of historians almost as basically as chroniclers. Like, here's a bunch of facts. I am
mhm,
approaching this in a weirdly neutral way that isn't actually
mhm,
possible in any
mhm,
way, shape, or form. Um, and there you go. Here is historical knowledge, which I pass on to you. And that's not how I write normal history. It's definitely not how I'm going to write this in-universe thing as Beaumont Kin. He had to be part of it. Um, but then when you start thinking about because I wanted this to be, a serious in-universe history book because, both me and like my editor David Fenterman at DK
mhm,
and like thought that we think there's an audience for this. We think that if
mhm,
we pitch this right and we stick the landing, people are going to enjoy this, and they're going to enjoy it because it treats Star Wars like it's real.
mhm, mhm,
Because
mhm,
that's what we do as Star Wars fans. We treat Star Wars like it's real because we're so excited and we're so enamored
mhm,
with it and the way that we think about it and the like. But in that context, when you're writing a book like this, then you do have to treat it like it's real, and you have to
mhm,
treat it with the seriousness and kind of the gravitas and the kind of the hard-eyedness that, if you look at things that have happened in the Star Wars universe that are awful,
mhm,
clearly objectively awful, awful things, you then have to write about it like it happened.
mhm,
And you have to infuse that reality into it because otherwise the conceit evaporates, it falls apart, and it's at that point that you start to lose the reader.
mhm,
That if you do, if you're, there are Easter eggs in my book. I had quite a lot
mhm,
of fun in like the footnotes and stuff like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
There's
mhm,
a level of it where you can kind of, you're doing bits and pieces, but you can't write a book like this when you're constantly winking at the audience. You
mhm,
have
mhm,
to treat it as seriously as the audience want you to treat it, but also you have to treat it as seriously as the audience don't know that they want it yet. For quite a long time when the book was announced, everybody was like, "Oh wow, an in-universe history book," and it's like, well, yeah, it is an in-universe history book, but that's not all that it is. There's
mhm,
there's more to the book than just the surface level of it's an in-universe history thing, and we managed to keep quite a good poker face
mhm,
on that until the book came out and people started reading it, and then realised that this is what it means to be an in-universe history book. It might not necessarily be what you thought it was or what you thought that you wanted, but we believe that this is what you want.
Mhm.
You just don't know it yet because you haven't seen it yet. And that was a big kind of part of my kind of theoretical process with
Mhm.
it, but which is very, very similar to how I would write a book about the First World War, or any of my kind of academic things of kind of like you have to you have to treat it with the seriousness that
Mhm.
it deserves.
That's great, and I totally agree because I think that's one of the things that I definitely enjoyed about the book going through it because it's one thing about which was a concern of mine, and I think maybe a lot of people going into this is like, oh, how am I going to engage with a book that's going to tell me facts about moments in Star Wars that I'm already aware of, right? It
Yeah,
has to it has to do something to not reinvent them, but to structure them narratively in a way that like gives you a new perspective on them that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of because myself and other people, even more so than myself, are such know so much lore, right?
yes,
That it's just like, well, how are you presenting this information to them in a new way that they can be like, okay, I got something from the thing that I already knew that I didn't already know, and
yeah.
I think that's the really interesting things about it.
One of the big things, like almost like the foundational conversation. It was like an ongoing conversation, but it was like particularly at the beginning was how does Beaumont Kin know the things that Beaumont Kin knows if
Hmm.
Beaumont Kin hasn't watched Star Wars?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of that kind of heavy lifting is done by the footnotes of, okay, trying to identify things that we think might exist in paperwork in the Star
Hmm.
Wars galaxy. But, no one's recording conversations between Palpatine and Vader. No one's keeping minutes of that type of stuff. So
Hmm.
those types of things are never going to exist. And you have
Right.
to find ways around those absences. And one of the things that we wanted to create was a situation where the audience has watched Star Wars. They know everything there is to know because they saw it on the screen. But because Beaumont Kin hasn't watched Star Wars, there are
Hmm.
gaps in his knowledge, and those gaps in his knowledge sometimes inform his conclusions, and sometimes
Hmm.
he's right when he guesses, and sometimes he's wrong when he guesses.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what we wanted to create in the audience was a feeling of firstly reading something and reading Beaumont King go, I think this is what happened, and us going, no, I know that didn't happen, like you've said it has because I've watched
Hmm.
Star
Hmm.
Wars. But if I'd only had access to the couple of things that Beaumont Kin has mentioned here, maybe I'd actually draw a very similar
Mhm,
conclusion to what
mhm,
Beaumont Kin has because that's the only material that's available. If we take out like a conversation between the Emperor and Vader, or the like, and all we've got is a few little disparate bits of information, maybe that is the logical conclusion that you might draw. So yeah, he's wrong, but I understand why he's
mhm,
wrong.
mhm.
And then that's a little thing that the audience, the reader, then gets of kind of, I know what the reality is here, but I can kind of see how you might draw that conclusion if this was all you had to work with.
Right, right. Which in many ways is a reflection of current society, right? And like a lot of distrust in experts. It's just like, well, why aren't you right all the time? And it's just like, well, because you can only make an educated guess or analysis based on the available data, and sometimes that data is incomplete, and that's why scientists and like professionals in fields are revising
Yeah,
their findings and revising conclusions because that's what it is, right? It's always about like there's no perfection in anything, right? It's always
no,
a goal that you always strive to and keep moving towards. So and in that way, I think that it's very telling because I think so much of what's in the book it's such a reflection of us right now in terms of like not how we're engaging with Star Wars. Star Wars is just a mirror, but like how we're engaging with everything around us. And one of the things that you were mentioning that I think is of particular interest is choosing a POV and choosing a character that is going to be this proxy through which we're engaging with this historical narrative through Beaumont Kin. Because it
yeah,
could have, we could have written this book. It's like, oh, it's just a Star Wars history book, and
yeah.
and done. And we don't need to say who wrote it. It's just a book that's written in universe. So, how important was it for you to choose a historian in universe that's actually writing it? How did you end up with Beaumont Kin, and how important was that character for this?
So the book doesn't work if there isn't a named, recognizable character. And Beaumont Kin is in The Rise of Skywalker. He's not in like on screen all the time in The Rise of Skywalker, and he's not even on screen identified as a historian. That kind of comes
Mhm.
out in like the making of books and The
Which
Rise
was
of
another question
Skywalker.
I had. Yeah, was that something that you influenced into that character, or was that something that serendipitously happened in terms of the development of his background?
S So I knew, I'd seen The Rise of Skywalker, and recognized that Beaumont Kin's role in that film is, to be exposition,
Mhm.
effectively. And then, once I'd seen, like, in the years afterwards, like, the making of, books and go, he's got a historical background. I thought, "Oh, that's cool," like a Star Wars historian.
Mhm.
But then when it became time to start thinking about the book, I was set on it being him pretty much immediately. In fact, to the point that I don't think this can work if it isn't him. Um, Firstly, because we could have invented a character and maybe it would have worked
Mhm.
that way. But certainly, of the characters that we've seen on screen, Bowman Kin is the only one who even identified in like the meta texts of Star Wars, who is a historian and therefore has historical training, which means we don't have to explain why he's writing and acting in the way that he does. If we were to
Mhm.
get say, okay, you know what, this book is being written by Poe.
Mhm.
Poe Dameron's going to write this book. He's decided to take some time away from being a hotshot
Mhm.
fighter pilot, and he's going to become a historian. And so it's like,
Mhm. Mhm.
is he? Yeah, is that the next character arc for Poe Dameron? Why is he talking like this? Why is he writing like this? Because it's not him. He doesn't have
Right.
that existing character background. So you'd spend a lot of the book trying to explain why he's acting in the way that he is. Whereas with Beaumont Kin, because he got the background but was also a slightly blanker slate,
Mhm.
um, it meant we'll just act like this is how he always does it, and therefore kind of becomes self perpetuating. Um, but I was adamant, and I say adamant like people were trying to talk me out of it. Everybody was on board with this. So David Fentiman at DK was on board with it. Lucasfilm were happy with it. Was that it needs to be a named character because he has to be part of this. I had a
Mhm.
vision for the kind of the emotional arc that Beaumont would go through
Mhm.
with with the book, in amongst doing the analysis and the like, because this has to be a book that is written as a necessity. This isn't,
Mhm.
somebody doing this as a hobby. This is Beaumont Kin, absolutely, like the core of his being, believes this is the most important thing he can do in the universe right now. And that has to be transmitted to the reader through the book.
Mhm.
Um, so once it was kind of like, this is going to be him, this is what it's going to be, all the other parts start falling into place. um and because it was like an existing character, and there was all this stuff that was established in his background, and also by this point he'd appeared in Shadows of the Sith by Adam Christopher, he'd
Mhm.
appeared in a
Mhm.
couple of graphic novels, and like, again, giving him this kind of research backstory that just allowed us to just step straight into it without having to kind of create or inform the audience about a character who hadn't existed before. Whilst, I don't necessarily believe that everybody who's picked up the book is heavily steeped in
Mhm.
Beaumont
Mhm.
Kin lore. He is a character who's existed on screen. People know, generally speaking, who he is. Um,
And oh, sorry.
no, 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 go
Continue.
for it.
No, no. I was just gonna say that we choose this character. He's a historian. He's gonna be the POV in which we're kind of doing the narrative thread of this book. And obviously, you're the actual writer of the book. You're a historian. You're
Yeah.
establishing like all these narrative threads of like what's the journey, right? That Beaumont's going through here. So is there anything from Beaumont Kin that you injected of yourself there, or are there any similarities between you guys in terms of like how you're writing or how you approach certain things? Like, is there any Dr. Kempshall in Beaumont Kin?
I think I've said this to a few people. I think Beaumont Kim might be a better historian than I am, which is like a really weird realization. But he's a lot more conscientious and he's a lot more careful,
Mhm.
perhaps, than I am. Now, he's trying to write a book that in his mind will hopefully kind of change the galaxy.
Mhm.
With the best will in the world, my book about First World War computer games is not changing planet Earth. So the stakes are slightly lower
Mhm.
for some of my stuff. Um, and the way that I was envisaging Beaumont, in a world, in a galaxy where, the First Order has recently appeared, clearly there were some still kind of lingering sympathies towards the Galactic Empire from various people, that he has to be so diligent with his research and with his footnotes and with his, like, laying out all of his conclusions, Because what he doesn't want is some neo-imperial goblin to go, oh, actually, this
Hmm.
file that you've cited here is wrong, so therefore your entire book is worthless, and we don't have to listen to any of it. And that's, in my head, is kind of what Beaumontkin's concerned about being dismissed before anybody can read the stuff. Um, I mean, there probably are bits and pieces of me in there. I mean, the tone of the book, I tried to, Beaumontkin doesn't have many lines in The
Hmm.
Rise of Skywalker. Obviously, he has like the famous lines about, dark science of the Sith and cloning and all of those
Cloning,
bits and pieces.
yes. Secrets only the Sith knew. Yeah.
Yeah, but I did try and take a little bit of that in that at points when Beaumontkin is like particularly exercised, or he's in his feelings a little bit, the sentences get shorter in the book. He speaks in like very clipped sentences, which is because in Rise of Skywalker, when he's like shocked by that moment, he speaks in very short sentences. It's like sentences of 3 or 4 words. And I tried to kind of carry that over
Mhm.
a little bit into the book. But I suppose the thing from me that probably most transfers is the feeling of what it's like to do archival research and to sometimes find that archival research upsetting and shocking and unsettling in ways that
Mhm.
the stuff that when I go away and do normal historical research, the stuff that shocks me or upsets me in the archive is always the stuff that I didn't expect. Um, and trying to transmit a little bit of that into Beaumontkin, because there are moments in the book when you can tell that he's shocked and you can tell that he's
Mhm.
upset, and he's shocked and upset by the things that he didn't see coming in his
Mhm.
archival research,
Mhm.
and trying to convey a little bit of that feeling into Beaumontkin so that the readers get a sense of what it must be like to go and spend 8 hours in an archive and come out of it upset or
Mhm. Mhm.
traumatized or unsettled in some way, and then have to try and convert that into words on a page. Is probably the element of me that I've given
Mhm.
Beaumont. He
Mhm.
won't thank me for it, obviously, because
Obviously.
he doesn't need that trauma in his life. But that's what I tried to put into Beaumont.
Eh, and you were mentioning about Bowman about trying to make sure that he has the best access to as many sources as he can, so that
Yes,
he is able to write in the most accurate way about the events that he's analyzing throughout the book. And obviously you have to go through a similar process in writing Rise and
yeah.
Fall of the Galactic Empire. So like how did you prepare to write this book? Because as we were mentioning before, it's Star Wars history. I mean, and
There's a lot of stuff.
and exclusively like canon history, right? There's so
Yeah,
much. Because if we add expanded universe, it's almost unmanageable. But with Star Wars canon, like what was the process of writing such a sprawling tome that touches almost every single piece of that canon, and how did you compile these events that you needed, right, to be able to tell a story? Because it just sounds like a daunting exercise.
it was pretty daunting. I mean, I'm quite fortunate in the sense of, because as previously mentioned, I'm just a ridiculous geek.
Mm.
I already owned quite a lot of the books, and like fortunately, my archive is across the room on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
To varying extents, it makes it saves a lot of money on train fare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so fortunately, I already had a lot of material, and I also have a very like odd memory, and partly this is probably from kind of academic training of being able to remember where a couple of lines were in a book,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
the sense of it's about midway through the book. I think it was on the right hand page. I think it was on the bottom of the right hand page, and I think it was before X. So
Yeah.
eventually, you're able to hunt down the bits and pieces that you're looking for. But also, the benefit of doing this as opposed to like any other bit of historical research is that I had access to Lucasfilm Story Group,
Mm-hmm.
which helps a lot. Being able to be able to call on people who have all of the Star Wars information, and they did a ton of heavy lifting for me. So the way that we would write the book is I'd write it in 5 chapter chunks, and each chapter
Mm-hmm.
is about 4 to 5,000 words long. So I'd sit down and be like, chapter one.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also, at the same time, before writing chapter one, I would write down a bunch of questions about stuff that I was interested in for chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and I would send them off to DK, and they'd send them up to Story Group. And
Mm-hmm.
then, as I worked my way through chapters 1 to 5 with answers that previously come down, they would be working their way down through the questions, and then
Hmm.
I would send off my chapters, and they'd pass each other in the internet, and I'd end up with a bunch of answers. Some of them must have at times think, "Well, why does he care about this?
Hmm.
What is this random bunch of insane questions from kind of some British historian lunatic who is asking about weird bits and pieces?" Um, but they were incredibly helpful and incredibly on board with um, with what it was that we were trying to do, and they were very, very invested in it, which helped a lot. Um, which meant that we were able to draw from the wealth of Star Wars, because again, if you're in the Star Wars universe and you're treating it as it's real,
Hmm.
there's no such thing as oh, this was in a graphic novel versus this was in The Empire Strikes Back. It all happened. It's all
Hmm.
real, and therefore, to varying extents, you have to treat it all with the same level of serious consideration. So being able to pull in all of these kind of different bits and pieces was really, really helpful. Although I remember at one point, um, they sent me like the plot of Jedi Survivor
Hmm. Hmm. Oh,
in a
yeah, cool.
PDF,
Yeah,
and I was like, I don't want to read that. I want to play the game. What? Why
yeah.
would you?
That's
Why
the
would you
problem when
send me
you're
this?
in. You
Yeah.
gotta know.
So I had to sit on it for a little bit and then wait until there was like a combination deal on new Xbox and
Hmm.
Jedi Survivor, so I could play the game really quickly in like 2 weeks and then read the PDF in case there was
Yeah,
anything that I missed. Because I'm still a fan, guys. What are you?
right.
I want to play the game. Um,
I just
so
imagine now that someone over at Lucasfilm just has a folder of PDFs that summarize all the media
yeah,
there to just have quick access to events.
yeah. So like a couple of friends have said, obviously, and it's clear from Rise and Fall. I really liked Andor.
Hmm.
I was watching Andor whilst the kind of the setting up of the book was going on in the background. So it was
Hmm.
looking very,
Hmm.
very likely that the book was going to happen. We hadn't signed a contract or anything like that, but that's always basically the
Hmm.
last thing that happens. Um, so not only was I watching Andor as a fan, I was watching Andor like a praying mantis,
Right.
to be like,
Right.
this is all fantastic. I have to find a way of replicating some of this tone and some of this bits and pieces. And a few of my friends have said, knowing what they know now, they'd have quite liked to have watched me watching Andor. Kind of,
Taking
perched
notes
on the edge of my
furiously. Yeah.
seat, desperately trying to cram as much information into my eyeballs.
Which I mean, and definitely I definitely got it because I'm also a big Andor fan. So like every time like all those bits and pieces came up, it definitely piqued my interest even more, and also generated like a question, right? Because it's one of those things where some Star Wars media lends itself to be taken more seriously than others just because of how that tone is expressed. And I
Yeah.
think in a book such as this one, we're talking about the atrocities of the empire and
Yes.
political unrest and all these historical things that are discussed throughout the book. Andor kind of more easily tonally lends itself to be interpreted and written about in such a way. So we have Star Wars Rebels and we have Star
Yeah.
Wars Resistance and a lot more, for lack of a better word, a light-hearted Star Wars,
Yes.
which not it's not a knock to those stories in any way because there's a lot of heavy and important themes, specifically with Rebels. Because in Rebels, when we learn about the Gorman massacre and all these things,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of heavy stuff in Rebels, but
It's
tonally,
a
right?
different tonal thing.
Tonally is exactly so. Tonally is different. There's a lot of and like young Jedi adventures.
Yeah.
It's very kid friendly. So like there's this tonal disconnect that works narratively in terms of visual media for the different age groups that are engaging with it. But in a book like this, right, where you have to kind of unify everything
Yeah.
and bring it all together into one cohesive narrative, like what was that process to to take things that are sometimes a little goofy and silly, but then
Yeah.
like inject the gravitas and seriousness that is being, that the crushing weight of the empire has on them.
Yes. Um, and you're right, in the sense that, these things do exist in different ways. And, certainly that some of the early seasons of Rebels are a little bit more like Saturday morning kid show
Hmm.
where, the pesky rebels are getting away. We'll see you
Yeah,
next week, type of thing. But also by the time you get to the end of Rebels, and you go, was that a kid show?
yeah, exactly.
Really? My
Yeah.
God. Like quite a lot of like awful stuff happens from
Mhm,
like the second half of the, or even like the beginning of the second season
mhm,
when Vader and Tarkin turn up. You know, there's some pretty dark stuff in Rebels. But that's kind of saying earlier that, you know, when you're in universe or you're writing something in universe, you know, all of these things happened in
mhm,
some way,
mhm,
shape, or form. And you know, some of it is goofier than other bits, but
mhm,
because it also happened in the past, as far as Bob and Kin's concerned, some of that goofiness just isn't going to translate into like an archival record that
mhm, mhm,
he
mhm,
can look at. Um, but also, Star Wars is a galaxy filled with weird and wonderful things. Like the most powerful man in the universe can shoot lightning from his hands.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
That which that's not a normal thing that that someone can do. You
yep.
know, people can
Mm,
levitate stuff with their hands, and they can jump high, and they can do all of this stuff. So there's already this kind of mystical, unusual
mhm,
nature to Star Wars, which means that whilst we might look at it and go, that's pretty weird. I just don't necessarily know if people in universe would find any of this stuff particularly weird, because you know there are stories and there are nursery stories and there are, you know, going to be TV dramas and the like with
mhm,
Jedi and all these people doing all this stuff. So to an extent, some of this must just be much more mundane. Even if you're, you know, you're growing up in the Old Republic and you've never seen a Jedi before, you've
mhm,
probably seen Jedi in like holo films or holo dramas and stuff like that. You
mhm,
understand what they are. Um, so in that sense, it kind of, I think it helps to consider Star Wars in Star Wars, which I think helps remove some of the kind of the strange mystical stuff and the goofiness, because all of it has clearly happened and therefore it's fine.
mhm,
And with that, since you can just blow straight past it, go, yes, you know, again, the most powerful man in the galaxy can shoot lightning from his hands. And he's got a cyborg friend who walks around with him, and you know, Kanan Jarrus can bat away blaster points with his lightsaber for
mhm.
just days on end, apparently, and never get shot. All of that is fine because all of that is clearly what happened.
It's just one of those things that always like fascinates me. Living through a Star Wars story where we have characters like Kalnaka, and then all of a sudden Gungi also exists, and oh my god, and Neil, and like all these like sweet, adorable characters within this like galaxy, also filled with horrifying things. Uh, so it's always interesting to see, yeah, how we maintain those tones and be like,
Yeah.
exactly, they can coexist, because in many ways it is a reflection, right, of our world. There are atrocities happening now on certain parts of the world, but then there's, you know, kids making fun videos for the defunct TikTok that are like in from a third point of view. You know, it kind of looks silly in contrast. uh it's appropriate, I guess, that that
Yeah.
exists in Star Wars is what I'm trying to get
And
at.
also, you know, I can, you know, as a First World War historian, I could, you know, reach into my First World War knowledge and pull out like a weird, goofy story that would make
Mhm,
people go, "There is no way that is true," and yet weirdly, it is
mhm,
true.
mhm.
You know, weird things do happen in the world.
I mean, there's a reason why we have the adage that truth is stranger than fiction.
Yes.
Um, But is there something in terms of like researching all of the Star Wars eras and histories and going back and forth with the story group that influenced the story in any way? Because I mean, there's story, we've read countless times where authors are going through a book, and as they're going through it, they discover that the story must go in a different direction, or something happens and it impacts how they're interpreting a certain writing that they're doing. Did something like that happen through the writing process of Rise and Fall that make you do like, oh wait, I was gonna go in this direction, I needed to go over here, or story group said like, actually this is different, which kind of changed your plans for a certain chapter or narrative?
Um, I think the most interesting thing along those lines was, I know story group already knew this anyway, but for me, that when we were in kind of the earlier stages, is that how much of the Galactic Empire actually doesn't exist.
Mhm,
Like the audience does a ton of heavy lifting in understanding the Empire. You know, we're all watching thing going, yeah, I imagine the Empire probably does teach kids at school that the Jedi are evil,
mhm,
and you know the Emperor is fantastic. But we've never seen that. That's never appeared in anything. But we look at it and go, well, the Empire is, a collection of absolute scumbags. So I imagine that in most circumstances they'll do what a collection of absolute scumbags would do. Um, and actually, how much of the kind of the backstory of the inner workings of the Empire actually didn't really exist.
Mm,
Yeah, there were fragments of it, and Story Group had like tons and tons of fragments they were able to help me with. But there were times when we were like, okay, well, we need to do like a like a foundation of bits and pieces of the imperial economy, or bits and
mm,
pieces of imperial industry, or bits and pieces of imperial society. We're going to need to invent this and then plug in the
mm,
bits that we do have so that we can then tell the story that we want to tell. And it needs to be specific enough that it feels real, but kind of um, broad enough that it's not that it doesn't necessarily have to be galaxy wide. We're not going to chain some filmmaker in 20 years to
mhm,
whatever the
mhm,
random stupid British historian wrote in his book 20 years previously. There has to be
mhm.
space for
Right,
variation. The
right.
Empire is big. They're not Everyone's not doing exactly the same things all at exactly the same time.
Right, it's not as if
Um,
Atten at Skeleton Crew is gonna now change how the financing information that Beaumontkin had,
yeah,
works.
absolutely. And in that sense, it was actually trying to build a cohesive understanding of some of the stuff of how the empire functions that might not even necessarily make it into the book, just so that
Mm,
we understand, we have a
mhm,
shared
mhm,
understanding of what the empire is, so that when we talk about it, it's not too detached from the reality of the
mhm,
little
mhm,
bits
mhm,
and snippets that we had. And I mean, that was a ton of fun, but there was also kind of like various moments of, wow, actually, we don't know anything about this
mhm, mhm.
in the Empire. I guess we're going to have to make it now.
So in many ways, what you're saying is that a lot of the process also helps not just inform yourself, but will now help inform like other writers going
I mean, I
forward
certainly
in
hope
terms of like
so.
how
Um,
maybe Tony Gilroy was referencing some of this for Andor season 2. Now that we've got more information about the inner workings of the Empire.
it's possible, although Tony Gilroy is a lot better at this than I am. So I don't think he needed like the spark notes or the footnotes from my book to help him tell the story that he's telling.
And we'll see. We're definitely very excited for Andor season 2.
I think it's going to be great. I
It's
think it's
gonna
going to
be
be
it's
really
gonna
good.
be really good. I mean, it's gonna be definitely like a kind of stressful because of like we're the days that we're living in. But speaking of days that we're living in, you were mentioning originally that you needed to have Beaumont as an anchor character because he was gonna set the stage about what the book is about and
Yes.
what he wants to convey through the book. So I guess this is kind of a two-tiered question. One is just what would you say is ultimately what Beaumontkin wants to do with writing The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire? And well, let's answer that first, and then we'll go into the
Yeah.
second part.
So I think Beaumont Kin wants and needs everybody to reconsider what they think they know about the Empire. And to actually, really look at it. These are all the things that he's gathered up about the Empire. This is what the Empire is, and he wants you to stare really properly into the abyss with it. But I think what Beaumont Kim wants, and to an extent, this isn't actually my decision to make. This is just kind of
Hmm.
my inner thought process. Is that Beaumont Kin wants people in the galaxy to understand that fighting the Empire isn't a spectator sport.
Hmm.
You either do it or
Hmm.
you don't.
Hmm.
And if you don't, you either live with or don't live with the consequences of that. So I think that's Beaumont Kin's driving kind of desire to tell people that if this is not what you want, then there are steps that you have to take to ensure that we don't end up with another empire or another first order or
Hmm.
another whatever. That it's not enough to just sit on the sidelines with it and pass it on to the next generation or the next generation. I think that's what is driving him with
Hmm.
this. And he says at various points, the concept of never again
Hmm.
actually has to mean something. You have to
Hmm.
do something to make sure that never again means never again.
Yeah, in many ways, it's parallel to Luke Skywalker in Last Jedi, right? Where people who were upset at the character's portrayal in that movie are just like, "Oh, but he defeated the dark side and he overcame his, temptations and Return of the Jedi and all that stuff." But the point of the movie is like you never stop fighting against it
No,
because
The
because
dark side is
it's
always
always
there
there,
and
and
present.
we're all every day. It's like a fight against the dark side and a fight against the Empire. So
Yeah, and
in
I was
please
going to say, and
continue. Sorry.
what Luke Skywalker does, he may well be wrong, and he probably is wrong in
Hmm.
what he does by putting himself into exile. But he thinks he's doing the right thing. He's
Hmm.
taking action. He's not passively waiting for the decision to or the circumstances to change. He does what he thinks is
Hmm.
necessary to prevent the dark side from coming. He's probably wrong, but he's acting in that sense. He's
Hmm.
doing a
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm. Just because passivity and no and inaction is a form of action in of itself.
Yeah.
It's acquiescing in many ways, even though I think some people would like to not believe that because no one wants to think that they're contributing to the empire. But in many ways, it is a form of consent. Uh, Dr. Kempshall, would you say that Beaumont Kin's uh, purpose with the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire aligns with yours?
Um, I mean, a significant part of my purpose was to write a Star Wars book because I've always really wanted to do one and for people to like it. So, um, I don't live in the Star Wars universe. I don't have to worry about, people who can shoot lightnings from their hands. So the stakes are slightly lower for me than they are for Beaumont Kin. I think my kind of main purpose with it, aside from writing a good book and treating it
Hmm.
seriously and giving people what they wanted, um, was to actually show people what historians do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is that was really important to me, particularly in you see it in the introduction and various parts and pieces where like Bowmankin shows his workings and he goes, and even at points when he's not sure, he goes, well, A contradicts B, but if I look at some other stuff, then maybe B. It's possible that it's B,
Hmm.
but I think that it's A, but I think it's B. And showing people that this is what historians
Hmm.
do. This is how we do our work. Um, and that it's okay if Beaumont is wrong. Beaumont says himself in the introduction, I might be wrong about some of this, and in
Hmm.
5 years' time or in 10 years' time, a better book about the Empire might come out
Hmm. Hmm.
and contradict all of my stuff. And it's fine because we'll know more, and more people will interact with the
Mhm, mhm,
concept of
mhm,
the Empire to show that historians do serve a purpose, and this is what the I consider the purpose of a historian to be, to kind
mhm,
of explain not just the here's a bunch of stuff that happened, but why did it happen? What does it mean if these things are true? What does it mean if we look at these various things? What conclusions can we draw from it? And I've said to some of my colleagues, I reckon I could use the introduction to Rise and Fall to
okay,
teach my students how to write an essay because Beaumont Kin takes you step by step through the process of writing an essay. He identifies his archives, he identifies his biases, he identifies his argument and its conclusions. He talks about some of his blind spots and what those considerations might be. But there's nobody
mhm,
who gets to the end of that introduction, whilst you don't necessarily know like the depths of the realities of the empire, you can read the introduction and get a pretty good idea of where this book is going. And that's how I've always like told my students how you should write your essays. So I think my main kind of drive was to show people this is what it means to be a historian. This is how
mhm,
we
mhm,
do it. And yes, when I'm writing a book about First World War computer games, I'm not changing the world, but
mhm.
you always treat the subject as seriously as it deserves to be treated. And it just turns out that Beaumont Kin is dealing with the most serious subject in the entire Star Wars universe.
Yep, and for what it's worth, I think that even small acts of insurrection definitely make a change in lots of people's lives. So I think that things like these are important because it helps open the eyes of people in ways that they might have otherwise not have had them open. So I definitely thank you for the book because I think
Oh, thank
not
you.
only has it been like a great read for myself, but judging from my peers online and what I've heard, like a lot of people have really enjoyed it. So I think it was it has been and will continue to be an important book, and it definitely came out at the right time. So we're very thankful for you having written it. But before we sign off, I mean, obviously you've been writing a lot of stuff. We have like a couple of Star Wars books that you have already given us, but after writing Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire and History and Politics of Star Wars, are there any other areas of Star Wars that you would like to explore in the future?
I don't really know because a lot of people, like even before the book had come out, were like, "Oh wow, are you going to do X next? Are
Mhm.
you going to do like a history of the Galactic Republic and stuff like that?" And there was like an element of like, "Calm down, guys.
Yeah.
Jeez." Like the book's not even out yet, and I'm
Yeah,
real
let me
tired
take a break.
because yeah, like it was supposed to be 90,000 words, and it was 120,000
Mhm,
words
mhm, mhm.
long. It's not a short book. Um,
It's a compliment in many ways.
yeah, and it's cool to know that people are invested and kind of hyped for this idea. At the moment, I don't know, because the thing about Rise and Fall was I was so clear not just on the topic of the book, which was the Galactic Empire, but about the story that Beaumont Kim wants to tell. So I knew
Mhm,
who the guy writing this is. I knew when it was going to be set, and I knew what the underlying kind of narrative for that was. I don't have that yet
mhm, mhm,
for any other ideas because it's not enough for me to just go, you know what, I'm going to write a book about the Galactic Republic. It's like, well, who's writing that book? When
mhm.
is that book coming out? Is it coming out under the Empire? Is it coming out under the New Republic?
Right.
What's it trying to? It's that thing that I was saying right at the beginning. What is it trying to say? What's the message that this book has? And until I have that, at the moment, I don't know. I imagine at some point, hopefully, I'll get the chance to do more. Again, to an extent, that's not really my decision.
Mhm,
DK and Lucasfilm will hopefully have seen that the book's done really well, and then we'll kind of we'll have conversations and we'll go from there. So yeah, and hopefully at some point I'll have a vision, like an idea of,
mhm,
oh, actually, this is what I want to do. This is super exciting. Then I'll get as excited about it as I did about Beaumont and the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. But until then, it's kind of it's all a bit open, I think, at the
mhm.
moment.
Well, that's good. We definitely want you to return and keep writing for this universe because it's very exciting to have your perspective on everything. So we hope that lightning strikes and we get more opportunities for that. But until then, where what do you have going on and where can people find you, Dr. Kempshall?
So I exist on, probably every form of social media since the Great Fracture.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
because everybody. I'm probably slightly more active on Blue Sky these days. And again, the benefit
Mhm,
of being the only Chris Kempshire who's ever existed is I'm real easy to find on all of these things. Aside from that, I'm not really working on anything huge at the moment. I'm probably kind of segueing out of academia into
mhm,
trying to kind of explore some other, like maybe write normal nonfiction books and
mhm,
other bits and pieces like that, and trying to find a way of making that work, which is quite exciting. And I need to, figure out what these things are going to be.
mhm, mhm,
What's the next, like, not Star Wars related. What's the next history book I want to write? What's the next history project I want to do? What's going to move me and what's going to excite me? So I'm still trying to figure those out um, at the moment. And again, when I do, I'll get really excited about it, and then I'll, probably get back into some normal archives and the like, and that'll be a ton of kind of non-Star Wars related
mhm.
fun. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out at the moment as well.
Good. I mean, but that's a good place, a place of opportunity.
Yes.
We'll definitely be on the lookout for everything that you have coming out in the future. So we like Palpatine. I mean, not a good personal quote, but it's still a good quote. We'll be looking into your future with great interest,
Yeah, what a
because
guy.
yeah, I mean, got some good one-liners, but
He
not
does. He
not
calls
not
everybody friend. He laughs a
yeah.
lot. He loves democracy. What's not to like?
That's not to like. Oh my god. Well, we'll talk about that on the next on our next episode, where we can delve into a couple of things a little more in a deeper fashion. But like I said, thank you so much, Dr. Kempshall, for joining us. This
Thank
has
you for
been
having
like a
me.
really great interview. Like I said, Rise and Fall of Galactic Empire has been a joy to read. So thank you so much for writing it. We urge anybody that is listening to this that hasn't read the book to please go and pick it up at your local bookstores if possible and enjoy this wonderful book. It's a great addition to any Star Wars nerds library. We need more books like this. We need more diversity in our writing. So like everything that's new and exciting is always welcome in this house. But once again, thank you, Dr. Kempshall. We'll be looking forward to what you have in store for us in the future. But with that, we have been Triad of the Force. You can find us on actually not on all the social medias anymore, because we've locked them all down. We are exclusively on Blue Sky nowadays until a billionaire destroys it and ruins everything that's good. Uh, if you like this, please make sure to share, like, and subscribe to like all of our channels so you can keep up to date with what Triad of the Force is doing lately. We're very excited for our new season now in 2025. We just wrapped up our Skeleton Crew review series with the wonderful Kelly Knox. So if you would like to watch that and all the rest of our reviews, please make sure to head out to our channel on Triad Of The Force, either on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, so you can check all of our previous Star Wars coverage and stay tuned for our upcoming coverage of Andor Season 2, which we're extremely excited about. But with that, we have been Triad Of The Force. Thank you so much. Be strong in this 2025, and we'll see you on the next one. May the Force be with you.